Good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's discussion on the work of Ofer Zur and Sam Keen. As some of you may have known, Ofer had planned to give a live program in Sonoma tomorrow, but unfortunately he passed away in late February and will not be able to host that program live. However, he did send me the PowerPoint presentation he was going to use for that program. And I'm sure he would make another edit or two on it. But if anyone on the call is interested in receiving that, it's too long to go through on a program today, but I could send you the PowerPoint if you're interested in that. Just send an email to georgia@praxispeace.org. So as probably most of you know, both Sam and Ofer had worked in a lot of the same areas in different ways. Ofer had a PhD in psychology, and Sam Keen had PhD degrees in philosophy and theology. So between the two of them, there was a lot of interesting discussion. They were friends and often worked together. I'm going to be citing Sam's book a lot, Faces of the Enemy, which I want to show you because everyone on this call should have a copy of this book. This is absolutely critical to know this information for anyone who really wants to understand politics and the mess we're in now, the kinds of wars we get into and how we're manipulated into supporting them. This is really critical information. So I'm going to be drawing a lot from it at the beginning as I set up the process for our discussion. There are 5 or 6 points we could talk about today, and I'm just going to run through them quickly. And if you know there's one that you really want to talk about, let me know. And I guess I should say, I know there are people who want to talk about their relationships or their stories with Sam, and this is not quite the place for that. Maybe if it's very short, but what we want to do today is have a tribute to them, which is about what they thought, what their thinking was, the writing, the ideas they brought to our understanding of warfare, of creating enemies, of propaganda, of myth making around all this. So I felt like to really honor them is to showcase this work and discuss the work and learn from it. I certainly have learned a lot from engaging in this work. So I'm going to go through the 5, and then we'll go back and I'll ask for your input or questions or discussion points. The first one is propaganda. The main purpose of propaganda is to paralyze thought, to condition individuals to manipulate their thinking into reactions with emotional rhetoric and images. Propaganda posters often present a life or death choice between civilization and savagery, light and darkness. Our propaganda would mean the enemy commits torture and atrocity and murder, but our side only does it when it's absolutely necessary. Important things to understand. So how is our current propaganda preventing us from asking some of the really relevant questions of our media, of our political representatives? The second point would be how enemies are created. What is the process of demonization and demonic images, inflamed rhetoric, calling the opposite group the barbaric nature of the enemy, or the enemy is insatiable, he has no proper limits or sense of legitimate boundaries. So how enemies are created would be the second point. The third, which actually dovetails to that, is the dualistic nature that shapes our thinking and prevents us from seeing a spectrum of issues where war is concerned. So it's dualistic, black or white, with us or against us. And I think it's very important to be able to step back from that way of looking at warfare, at any ideas really, where there's opposite sides. There's always more than 2 sides. And I think this is one of the discussions I had with both Ofer and Sam, is to understand that we are being pushed into these dualistic with us or against us type thinking. Fourth is the belief that war is part of human nature. It's not true, but it is our bias. And there's a lot of proof on this, which I'll go into later when it's my turn to talk again. But this is our cultural bias, that war is inevitable. And we need to understand that bias when questioning news feeds. What assumptions are made in our news feeds? And fifth, myths make killing or dying in war a sacred act. performed in the service of some god or immortal or nationalistic ideal. The mythic mind which governs modern politics is obsessively dualistic. It splits everything into polar opposites. So this is a really important piece here to understand warfare. Sam always said warfare is applied theology. Thought that was very, very important to understand how we buy into that kind of thinking when we justify a war. That it's, a crusade of some kind, the battle between the forces of good and evil, or the axis of evil. All that kind of rhetoric is what gets people manipulated into supporting a particular side. And the sixth, which we may or may not get into, is the role of a hero. Why do we even need them? This is a discussion I had with Sam and Ofer a lot of times, actually. Why do we need heroes? Can we honor the heroic act without making a deity of the person who does the heroic act? So we may or may not get to that, but I think it's an interesting point. So now to go back to, really, you can jump in anywhere you want, but I think it would be appropriate to begin with propaganda. Does anyone have something they would like to say about this? And if so, if you know how to use the automatic hand raising thing, that would make it a lot easier for me to see you when there are a lot of people on the call. Otherwise, just put your hand up. I'm looking now to see if I see anyone. Okay, so far.
I'll jump in, Georgia.
Hi, Azia, do you want to say something?
Yeah, nice to see everyone. It's a very nice frame you put on the event. Thank you for hosting. Yeah, the propaganda topic makes me think of this great advice I read at some point, which is if a headline makes you feel something strong, stop, because it's designed to mess you up and put you in a reactive state. And the people that write headlines do this on purpose. So just take a step back when that happens. That's been very useful advice as I try and stay calm reading the news.
I think that's a very good point, is if we see we're being emotionally triggered to question that. And Azia is Ofer Zur's daughter, just so you know. And she certainly knows his work well, I'm sure. Would someone else like to speak on this topic of propaganda? Or any of the other ones, but I think this is critical right now. One thing I'll bring up, since I don't see any hands at the moment, is in 1991, I was living in Yugoslavia. And that was when the Civil War broke out, and Croatia and Slovenia seceded from Yugoslavia while I was living in Zagreb, Croatia. And what we saw, I mean, the images we saw about what the Serbs were doing to Croats was just off the charts, really awful, horrendous imagery. And a friend of mine who was a journalist had been invited to go to a journalist conference in Belgrade, Serbia that summer. She wasn't going to go because she said it's all going to be propaganda. Not that we didn't have any in Croatia. So finally, she decided to go with a lot of friends pushing her to do it, to see what they were saying in Serbia. And what she saw, I mean, she came back really in shock. What she saw were the exact same photographs, and I really mean the exact same photographs that she was seeing in Croatia that were attributed to Serb atrocities. She was seeing them in Serbia attributed to Croatian atrocities. This was an incredible lesson. And, and it wasn't that she made a mistake. Even Warren Zimmerman, who was the US ambassador to Yugoslavia at the time, wrote about it in his book, Origins of a Catastrophe, how both sides were using the same pictures to denote atrocities by the other side. So this is why it's really important to not let yourself be triggered by this kind of stuff. It may be real, it may not be real. Who knows where they even got those pictures from? Some speculated they were from World War II. So this is why it's important to question. And I think both Ofer and Sam were so pointed on critical thinking, the importance of always questioning and not just taking what you hear from someone or what you read as gospel truth. It's, in a way, it's a discipline to be that critical, to be a critical thinker. But that's what their work was all about. And I'm sure if any of you read them, you know that. So I'm looking for other people who might want to. Okay, Mike, go ahead. You need to unmute, Mike.
I know. Yeah, I mean, right there, triggered and propaganda. I don't know. I'm so surprised nobody spoke to it, but yet anyway, maybe they're getting warmed up. Um, all I have to do is watch El Presidente, the Orange King, get up there and start talking. All he has to do is say 5 or 10 or 15 words, and I'm triggered. I can't help it. It's just I don't have to go into the reasons why. And when I see Carolyn Levitt, who I'm embarrassed to say is from my home state of New Hampshire, get up there, and that's propaganda. Okay. It's just constant, it's daily, or however many times I can stand to watch it. And I can't help but be triggered by the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 lies that come out within 25 minutes. So I don't know how you cannot be triggered. I haven't figured that out yet since November 5th. And neither has my wife, who I've said, grew up under Russian rule in the Czech Republic. And so she's just so aware of this. And first triggered emotion is I want to move to Canada, so we went up there and looked around, and a lot of interesting discussions up there. But anyway, so I don't know how you can avoid it. I'd like to avoid the news. I'd like to not be triggered, but I wake up early, 4:35 every morning, and the first thing I do is look at the news. I just can't help it. Not to mention the stock market just going like unbelievable. So how can that not trigger people? I don't understand. If there's a way, I'd like to know.
Well,
And the
that's
other thing, George, about war, how can I don't understand saying that. How can it not be part of the human experience and part of the human character when it's gone on for so many hundreds of thousands of years?
Yeah, I will address that later.
Okay, thanks.
Because I do have examples.
Okay.
But first, I want
Thanks.
to, anyone who wants to speak particularly on this issue. And as far as getting triggered, I think, yeah, we're going to get triggered by Trump. I don't have a television, which is one of the, which I'm very grateful for. But I think I don't even want to see him ever say a word at all. That's how I avoid him. I know what he's doing by seeing headlines, but I don't want to massage that horrible experience. So, but anyway, warfare is a different part of that too. So I know Ben has his hand up and Katie. So Ben first.
Yeah, I would say that propaganda, at least in my understanding of it, can be a neutral term. It has a pejorative connotation, but having done, mass political education, propaganda is basically reducing your message to bite-sized, meme-sized chunks that can dominate the cultural zeitgeist and understanding. And good propaganda, there's propaganda based on lies. There's propaganda based on facts. I consider a lot of my political work as a kind of high-end propaganda. It's like I'm selling the progressive agenda to a mass audience in my articles. So I don't have a problem with it. But what is shocking to me is the kind of propaganda that we're being exposed to, which is this postmodernist thing of they got to postmodernism before the left got there first, but they have dominated it now. And they speak without reference to actual factuality or truth. They will repeat the same lie despite repeated debunking. And you realize, the point is for them, for the audience they're aiming for, to make it a fact, whether it's true or not. So I think we have to start looking more deeply at how we're being propagandized. And just quickly, one other part of this that has to be mentioned is the failure of the mainstream media, for example, in properly covering the onslaught, the colonial massacre in Gaza. It's been shocking to see how people who I thought of, liberal Zionists that I thought were pretty rational people, are unable to detach from that ruinous project. And so that to me is the propaganda that's probably having the worst influence. And it's not showing any signs of letting up. In fact, they're now going on pogroms at universities to root out people who have pro-Hamas views, i.e., call for a ceasefire. So we have to watch for this conflation of Zionism with Judaism. I think that is the biggest lie we're being propagandized on. So that's my take on it.
Thanks for your input. Katie? You want to unmute, Katie?
The only thing I want to say is I I'm a little confused about, I understand the importance of carrying forward their legacy, their profoundly important intellectual works. But I'd like to also hear more about what was so passionate for them about it, because to me, this is a very moving moment. I mean, I just saw Ofer recently, and I just heard Sam was in town doing something a few weeks ago or something, and I just feel like it feels odd to just talk about, like, I'd like to hear from more people that knew them better as well.
Okay. Bill, I see your hand up. Do you want to go next?
Well, yes, I don't think anybody knew Sam better than me, except perhaps his wives, Patricia, of course. But we became very close friends because we shared a concern about how people were making enemies. In faces of the enemy, it's everybody has the opportunity to make an enemy that they'd like to do it. And Sam and I tried to do a film in Faces of the Enemy in which people would confront their own enemy making, because we all do it.
Mhm.
And also I just wish that we could bring him back here and ask him what was most important to him, because what was important to us in our relationship with him varied from person to person. But what did Sam most care about? Well, I think reading Faces of the Enemy is a good first step, or looking at the movie that we made together with the same name. And making a movie with anybody is a very interesting, complex experience, because what you're dealing with is not just the abstract ideas that go on paper. You're dealing with the individual as an individual, and his own personal confusions or struggles or doubts or fears. And that's what Sam and I did. We did it with one another, and sometimes I would tell Sam, Sam, do you really believe that? And that's what friends, of course, can do. We can confront one another in a loving, caring way, which, of course, I think was the fundamental message of Faces of the Enemy, is that we're not designed to be deceitful and destructive. We are manipulated into deceit and destruction by propagandized by individuals who want to get something from us or manipulate us into get us doing something. But it was a special treat to know Sam for those many, 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 many years, and to share with him our concern about how we look at one another, how we create in Faces of the Enemy, how we create enemies. We don't need anybody to help us. We're very capable of doing it on our own. And of course, as his close friend, I miss him profoundly. And the best we can do, of course, is read his books, see his television interviews, look at Faces of the Enemy, which he was very proud of, the book and the movie that we made together, because he would very much like you to see himself as I would like you to see himself.
Thank you for that, Bill. Yeah, one thing I always remember about Sam, he would say, we're not going to get any real answers if we don't ask the relevant questions. So he was always about asking the relevant questions, and the need to not always have an immediate answer, that we can stay with the question long enough that we actually learn something instead of jump in and need a quick answer to something. I see that one thing I do want to go into, if we're there yet, about the examples of cultures that did not go to war. And there have been many, and we don't learn about them in our history books. And I believe we don't learn about them because they don't confirm our bias. And our bias is toward colonization, it's toward warfare, it's toward amassing territory, exploiting resources. That's part of our Western bias. And so we tend to look at, when we're looking at history or when people are writing history, they're writing about places where those things happened. They're not writing about places where they didn't happen. And for instance, the Hopi Indians, Iceland has never been at war, Greenland has never been in war, Vanuatu has never been at war, San Marino, the 600-year city-state of Dubrovnik was never in war. So we have examples of it. It's just not, they're not in our history books. And I think our question has to be, why aren't they there? Why aren't we learning from them too? But we're not. So this is another place where the bias is really, and the assumptions being made are prohibiting certain ideas from entering into the discourse or even the thought process. So I think it's important to understand that no, war is not part of human nature. What's his name? Franz de Waal, who was a primatologist at Emory University, has written several books about the bonobos that he's worked with for 35 years and the regular other chimpanzees, and how bonobos are not warlike. They don't fight among themselves like the chimpanzees. And he's made the assessment that, you know, we have both of these possibilities in our psyche. What we choose to do is really up to us. We don't have to go down one at the exclusion of the other, which is pretty much what's happened in Western civilization. So I know that Azia has her hand back up, and then Ben does again. Azia, do you want to, where are you?
Yeah, thank you. What an evocative conversation. Sorry that it took my dad dying for me to join this wonderful group. A few things came to mind. First, what the Buddhists call othering, which is creating artificial distance between people.
Mm-hmm.
And even if friends or family members or a couple is bickering, that's a small scale war. So we just see it played out bigger between nation states, but in my opinion, it's the same pattern. And another thing that came to mind was talking about countries like Iceland that don't go to war and also don't make the news and are not taught as examples. They're making neutrality a choice, and that's brave, but there's also no charge to it. What gets you in the news is some version of a polarity, a stuck energy system of extremes. If you're right here in the middle, aligned to God or your own integrity, it has a neutral charge. But I think you're right, Georgia, and this is probably what your group is about, is how do we live there more often in our daily affairs and in our voting?
Thank you. Kim, I see
Well, I
you.
wanted to move on to the second. I was waiting for you to call it the second, how enemies are created. May I do that? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, obviously, Trump is a master at creating enemies. What he does is uses lies and misinformation, which his MAGA people don't seem to question, calling immigrants rapists and murderers. There's no evidence for that, and yet he continues to repeat it over and over. But he also frames it as immigrants are un-American, and he frames it in a patriotic way so that people say, we want to support America, and immigrants, like those people, always the other, you know, they build up this fear. Trump has used fear, of course, remarkably well. So many law firms, everyone seems to be afraid of Trump's power right now. But I just finished a book on the Ku Klux Klan from 100 years ago, and exactly the same model that Stevenson, who founded the Klan, used, which was to always blame the other and you frame it in an un-American way. These are un-Americans. You know, he included Jews, Catholics, Blacks, not just immigrants, and he targeted them in so many ways. And so reading that book was haunting because it reminded me of exactly what's happening now.
Great, thanks, Kim. Ben, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think, confirm your hypothesis about the fact that in our DNA, we have the strand, we have both bonobo and chimpanzee strands. And I think that, you know, from the perspective that I've been taught in, you're either a fixed Earth person who believes that history is a circle and that we're just going around this kind of Dharma wheel the same things are replicating, or you can believe that it's evolving. And I choose to believe and observe that it's evolving. And so from that point of view, then the process of peace education is not to deny the fact that, yeah, we have the chimpanzee instinct to crush, to fight and crush our enemies. We also have the instinct to cooperate. And the thing that has led to our evolutionary success is not the fighting, it's the cooperation. Every war is a setback for the progress of civilization, from that perspective. And so I think it's a matter of getting a kind of, it would have to go back to like doing mental health, public education, starting in elementary school, for how people could do conflict resolution. It would be a major cultural project to take on, which we're in no condition to do at this point. Nobody wants that discussion. But nonetheless, if we are to survive, it will be by precipitating epigenetically our cooperative parts of our DNA, not emphasizing and heightening the inflamed chimpanzee territoriality. We're just going to have to deal with that as humans and decide we have to evolve past those elementary levels.
Thank you for that. Yeah, cooperation is, well, there are two things that you brought up that are really critical there. One is cooperation, that evolution really does happen through cooperating more than through competing. Just like our body functions through all the different parts cooperating with each other, they're not competing with each other. And when they do, like cancer cells, then we don't win. Nobody wins. So I think it's a good analogy too, to understand that cooperation is the way forward, not really this cutthroat competition that we're so trained in. And that's another reason why we go to the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, because they have learned how to incorporate cooperation in business, in health, in politics, in social relations. They teach conflict resolution. And it's a huge complex, but they've changed the whole culture in the Basque region, which is extraordinary what has happened within 70 years, what has happened in that region. And it shows what's possible, what people can achieve with the right focus. And I'm going to call out in a minute, because Kim and I have been talking about doing another workshop in conflict resolution this summer, which we've done before, both in Sonoma, and we did them at Esalen Institute. So we're planning to do that again. It's time to be looking at these things again. So now I'm looking for more people who'd like to say something, and I hope there are, because I don't want to talk all the time. And you probably don't want to listen to me all the time. Oh, come on. There's got to be someone here who wants to talk or bring something up we haven't maybe touched on yet. Okay, then I'm going to move into a different area. Well, actually, I'm not. I'm going to look at an example. This is going to get heated now, and I'm going to expect some disagreement. I'm going to do a Sam thing or an Ofer thing. Both of them would do this at one point in their careers. Is to look at a situation that we're in right now with Russia and Ukraine. This is the hot one. And it's the hot one because there are progressives on both sides of this, or three sides. There are ones that are strongly supporting Ukraine no matter what they want to do. I don't think there's anybody strongly supporting Russia, but there are people strongly supporting negotiations and have been for some time. So that's a third point there, which we never have heard much about. Negotiations are something that are sort of we don't talk about. And that's the other part of, I guess, the US position often is to make the enemy a terrorist, and we don't negotiate with terrorists. So we don't have to deal with them. We just have to get rid of them. That is another way we have been manipulated into seeing things that way. The example I saw of negotiating with terrorists that really worked out so well for the whole society was the Basque region. I'm sure all of you are aware of the ETA, the Basque separatist group that was trying to get the Basque counties in Spain to separate from Spain and form their own country with the Basque regions of France. And the ETA was violent. I mean, they had killed almost 1,100 people in 60 years. And they formed as a backlash to Franco, who was suppressing the Basque people, not allowing their language to be spoken or even taught. And that created something like ETA. So they became a terrorist organization. maybe it was about 12 years ago. No, it was longer than that. No, it was about 12 years ago when a peace leader in the Basque region said, we've got to deal with this. And he started these truth and reconciliation discussions with victims and perpetrators of the violence in the Basque region over many decades. And what ended up happening is the ETA decided within a year that they would no longer be violent. They would not do that anymore. They would work politically. They didn't want to turn in their weapons because they were afraid of retribution. 6 or 7 years later, they turned in all their weapons. They said, we don't need them anymore. We don't fear for our lives or repercussions. And the year after that, they decided to dissolve the ETA completely. It no longer exists. So all the graffiti we used to see on the walls when we went in 2008, 2010, and 11, it's gone. It's like it never happened. It's like there never was an ETA. It's incredible that in fewer than 10 years, it was probably 7 or 8 years, from the beginning of that process of truth and reconciliation meetings to the organization deciding to dissolve itself. If they didn't have to be forced, they decided we no longer need to work this way. So that's what can happen when you negotiate with terrorists. I think it's critical that we negotiate with terrorists for reasons like that. And I think we'd find a lot more peace if we abandon this idea of first we're going to call you a terrorist and then we're going to say we don't have to negotiate with you. So all these things I think we really need to look at. These are things I certainly talked to Ofer and Sam about, and Sam a lot because I've known Sam for 50 years, I think, a really long time. So now I really want someone else to talk. So I'm looking. Kim, okay, great, Kim.
Well, I just wanted to add, I think, and you and I've discussed this, that there is a national belief that the way to support Ukraine is providing more arms, that more arms equals potentially more peace. And so we just continue to send an enormous number of arms, as opposed to what are the different ways of reaching peace other than arms. I think there's also an assumption that negotiation won't work, that Putin won't deal, all these things. Yet he is to some extent, and I think it's partly selecting the right mediators. So you need prominent people like Macron, or certainly not our president, but other who are skilled in negotiation techniques. But also you need to understand the needs of both sides and to be able to connect those needs to be able to provide, some kind of agreement. So I really have been so frustrated as a peace builder to see that the U.S. has continued to supply every number of weapons. That's not really going to get us to peace.
Right. Yeah, well, the economy seems to rely on all the weaponry that we continue to manufacture and sell abroad. I will go back to Ben, but I know there are a few people who are speaking a lot. So if there's someone else who wants to speak in the meantime, I encourage you to do so. But if not, I'm going back to Ben because he always has good things to say too. So go ahead, Ben.
I'll be brief here, but for me, watching this, I think bringing up the example of how the United States government has propagandized us regarding the war in Ukraine. And this was in collaboration with some of our hawkish allies like Boris Johnson in the UK, who were pumping the Ukrainians to stay in this fight. And, basically we'll fight to the last Ukrainian is how it came out. And what is just sad for me is 3 years ago, I said, I'm on record saying, the territorial negotiations that are going to end this conflict are apparent right now. In fact, had Ukraine cut a deal 3 years ago, they would have 1 million fewer casualties and something resembling an infrastructure. This country is wrecked for generations. I don't know if they'll ever be reconstituted. This could, and the deal is going to be the same deal that would have been done 3 years ago. So why did we have to chew up bodies for 3 years, spend $1 trillion on weapons? We could have made this deal had we a political culture that valued resolution and peace more than they do this kind of great power blustering, and Trump is a disaster. I don't know where that's going to end up. He is alienating even our Western allies at this point. That's a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, it's just the same deal is going to happen that would have happened 3 years ago, except for on less favorable terms to Ukraine. So how much did we get out of all of that bellicosity? Nothing. That's my take.
I do agree with you, Ben. I'm looking for other people. Mike, you wanted to say something?
I was just wondering, what's a question? I mean, you talk about negotiating, and that was a great point Ben just made. But what about, how do you do that in Israel with Hamas? It's been going on how many years? How do you negotiate peace there? Look what's happening now. They're trying to take back more land. It's horrendous. And in this country, like you said before, you speak out against it, you could be arrested, you could be deported. It's complete insanity what's happening in this country. By the way, this T-shirt, I wear it for fun all the time around Mill Valley. I know everybody's liberal here, but somebody said, if you say these words that I have here, that 90% of the world will know exactly who you're talking about. So I designed this, and just for those who are having trouble, I made it in orange. And anyway, that's just my little statement. But it gets a few laughs, a lot of conversation. But it's serious time. And I just this whole thing with Israel. How do you who's going to do the negotiating there? Trump and Netanyahu. I mean, when's it going to end? Anybody have any ideas?
That's a really difficult one. And
Too hard.
Only thing I could say is that there's none of the stakeholders are interested in having those negotiations, as far as I can tell. And that's part of the problem. It's disastrous what's happening there. Just beyond disastrous. How we get into these wars, I will go back to, I do think America has a war economy. We have to have so many arms manufactured and sold per year to keep that budget alive. And I know we talked about this in a previous discussion. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we thought we were getting that peace dividend. Remember when there was all that talk about the peace dividend? Of course, we never got it. And we never got it because we have to keep the war machine fed. And that meant we have been in war pretty much ever since. We've been, ever since World War II almost. There's Vietnam, there's Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, it's been one war after another that we're fueling. So I think that's something we need to look at also. But where the negotiators are going to come for the Middle East, that's a rough one. And I don't think anything's going to happen as long as Netanyahu is in power, and Trump too. So I'm going to go back to you, Ben, because I don't see anyone else. So go ahead, Ben.
All right. Well, yeah, I've got plenty to say always.
I bet you do.
But is regarding the resolution in Gaza, that person who I regard as probably my best guide to actually how these military conflicts end up is a Professor Mearsheimer, who wrote a book about the Israeli lobby years ago. He predicted 5 years ago. He said the Zionist entities that are promoting this propaganda, the Zionist propaganda around the world, will become the greatest enemy of free speech in America within a decade. And so that was 5 years ago. Now it's turning out like this is the fulcrum that's being used to pry the left loose. And similar to what happened to Corbyn in the UK, this kind of bogus charges of anti-Semitism. They're trying to use that same battering ram to take down anybody who is opposed to the ethnic cleansing that's going on in Gaza, or who is opposed to the apartheid state. You can be branded as you're no longer fit for polite society because you're expressing anti-Semitic views. That piece of propaganda is becoming very harmful. And according to Mearsheimer, who's a military historian, he said it's pretty much the Gazans are cooked. They're going to be ethnically cleansed. We don't know where they're going to end up, and I don't think the Israeli state cares except for elsewhere, is their answer. And it's going to happen, and we're all having to sit and watch it because the only power that had any ability to check their roll is bankrolling it. So that's above my pay grade as to how to stop that.
Yeah. So we have anyone else would like to talk? Before we do that, I'll go back to you, Ozzy, but I want to mention the book again, Faces of the Enemy. Bill talked about it, and I talked about it at the beginning. It is really important information. And I think the more, I see, I came to the big question mark up here. It's just an extraordinary book. It really is. And I think, you know what, I have underlined so many lines in that book and I go back and I look at it, I think I really have to read the whole book again because I've underlined almost the whole book. But it's really extraordinary. And I feel blessed that I had so many conversations with Sam about ideas in that book. He gave me in fact, he gave me some books that were translated into Slovenian and Croatian. And I saw it in the window in a Croatian bookstore, which was when I was there at one point. So it's been translated into lots of languages all over the world. And I think if people understood this kind of writing and this kind of thinking, because Sam was a deep thinker and so was Ofer as well. And the thinking, the idea of questioning, of never just taking things as they're presented to you, but having a bigger framework from which to question in. And sometimes if we're triggered, it's because we don't have the bigger framework. And I think that was one of the things that they both talked a lot about. And I want to mention too, before I go back to Azia, that I also still do have the PowerPoint that Ofer created. And if you want that, please email me and I will send it to you. And that's Georgia@praxispeace.org. I'll put it in the chat box too. So go ahead, Azia.
A great discussion. I'm taking a lot of notes and hopefully making some new friends. If anyone wants to be Facebook or LinkedIn connected, last name is Walker these days. Anyway, a couple thoughts that came to mind listening about the bonobos that live in harmony. They find a way to channel their energy. They're kind of famous for having a lot of sex and play and physicality. The urge to do conflict has to be channeled somewhere. So I teach Aikido, a harmonious martial art, where instead of two fighters, you have a fighter and a dancer. And I think it speaks to that human desire to do conflict in a healthy way and to do it with love. Ofer would always talk about fighting and loving. And as an Israeli, he was very comfortable, with conflict. It's such a huge part of the culture. Everybody's a veteran. But to somehow go into our lives and question things and do it with passion and with ethics, that was something really unique that he did. And then another thought that came to mind was, the protein bars, Kind bars, the snack, right? But the founder has this TED Talk on builders, the builder movement. Anybody watch this? Like 13 minutes. Please watch it after this. And the builder movement is about getting away from extremism. So no Bibi, no Hamas, fuck both of them. How do we build coalition? Because most people around the world want to raise their children and have a nice dinner, right? And maybe go watch a show or a play together. They want to live their lives. And that's most of us. But these extremists running the world, it's a problem. So I'm trying very much to be neutral, and it feels connected to peace for me.
Great, thank you for that. About the bonobos, I mean, one of the things that Franz de Waal said, they're making love all the time instead of war. They're very active in that capacity, which I think is, very, very interesting. That's one of the ways they channel that energy. And it's interesting that we're in a culture that it's okay to have movies that show horrific violence, but show a sex scene. Oh, this is really verboten. So it shows kind of the puritanical line that feeds right into the warlike behavior and how connected those two things are. That's also a very interesting, I mean, there's so many places we could go with this. I do hope some of you who live locally can come to the Aquas Cafe on May 6th, because that will be a live program. We can have dinner together and we can have a discussion. And there'll be separate tables, so you'll have a discussion with maybe 6 or 8 people, and it won't be like this. It'll be actually in person where you back and forth talking to each other. And I think that's an important way to have this discussion. I also think that, excuse me, that talking about ways to get to peace and the process to get there is really important. And I think one of the programs that we did with Ofer when was it? August? You probably know, Azia. I think it was August or September, where he was live from Israel. He went to Israel to make an apology for having been in the Israeli army when he was young, before he came to the US. And it was a really poignant interview, and it's on our YouTube channel. So please do go to Praxis Peace Institute YouTube channel. That program with Ofer is there, and many other programs that we've done on Praxis Zoom programs are there. So do visit that. And think of becoming members if you're not members. Now, all of a sudden, everybody wants to talk. That's what happens at the end. I'm going to go to Linda first because she hasn't spoken yet. Go ahead, Linda.
Thanks. Well, I guess I know this is about propaganda, but I think the thing that is kind of getting me more than the propaganda that we're constantly exposed to is the fact that Trump's going after any kind of resistance to the propaganda. So the speaking out, I mean, that scares the bejesus out of me. People are being, handcuffed and silenced and disappeared. I mean, Jesus, that's really frightening. So even if we have something to say against the propaganda, we can't do it. I mean, it's that. So we are really losing our democracy, and that is something that is going to be something that we can't easily get back. So for a long, and also just our reputation of our values. I mean, that just shows that we no longer are a free nation. So that scares me almost as much as the propaganda does.
Yeah, I think it does a lot of people I've been talking to. But look at Bernie Sanders and AOC. They're going around the country speaking out. They're not going to get arrested. They're not going to get put, I don't think so anyway. They're too visible and they have too much support all over the country, even from MAGA people. There are people on all parts of the spectrum who support Bernie and AOC for one critical reason. They may not agree with all of their politics, or even most of them, but they know they're honest. And what they're saying, they have a background that proves where they're coming from. They're not pushed this way or that way. They don't take corporate money, so they're not part of that game. So I think they have great credibility and they are standing up. So supporting them is really important. They're going to be doing more of these tours, and I highly recommend support them for doing that.
The only other thing I want to mention is that there's a film that's come out. It's hard to find. It's called No Other Land. And it looks at it. It's really good. It's a documentary looking at an Israeli and a Palestinian coming together and filming how the Israelis are just wiping out town after town on the West Bank. I highly recommend it.
Thank you for that. You might want to put it in the chat box, Linda.
I'll do that.
That. I'm going to go to people who haven't spoken yet, much yet. So, Diana, you're next.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think cult dynamics are an important addition to propaganda. I don't believe Sam talked too much about cults. I read it decades ago. But when you combine cult dynamics with the government and the military, you've got, and religion, because cults can be kind of like a religion, it's a really dangerous situation. And so I think that's what we're in now, which is new for us. They had it in Iran with Khomeini, but now we've got it here. And so there are things to learn about cult dynamics that could be relevant to this issue.
Absolutely. And I want to mention that Diana Alstad, who just spoke, is the co-author of the Guru Papers, which is an extraordinary book about cults and about how they work, how people get pulled into them, and how difficult it is to get out of them. But it's one of these brilliant books that I also underlined so many lines in the whole book that it's hard to get through just the lines without reading the whole book again. It's brilliant. So I want to recommend that to everybody. It totally dovetails with the work of Sam and Ofer. So I think I'll go back to Kim and then Ben. Kim?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to raise up something that hasn't been discussed yet, how in many ways each of us can create enemies without even barely knowing, and that is through something called assumptions. We all make assumptions all the time. Often they're not correct. So let's say somebody speaks to us roughly or what we think is meanly, we might just assume they're a mean person, right? Well, maybe their husband was just diagnosed with cancer, or they're losing their job. And so we make this assumption about people, and even about groups of people. And so we really have to watch that, this tendency, and we all do it, to make assumptions. We need to check it out. I know when I've had this happen, I often will ask somebody, gee, did I say something wrong? They look at me like, oh, it's nothing to do with you. I'm just really having a tough time right now. So questioning our assumptions is a really important factor here.
I think that's really good. And it reminded me that one of the questions that comes up in our Mondragon trip, it's come up very often, is someone in our group will ask them at Mondragon, well, what do you do since every worker is an owner? What do you do if someone's sloughing off on the job and they're not working right? Can you fire them? And the guy said, well, we don't fire people. He said, we would go and talk to them, find out what's going on in their life, that they're all of a sudden not working up to their usual standard. Their first impulse is to question, not to make an assumption. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's been so successful too. It's that human caring that's part of the process of cooperation in cooperatives. So there's a lot we can learn from that. If anyone's interested in coming to Spain, this is where you'll learn about that. It's an extraordinary example of what humans are capable of achieving in a short amount of time, completely changing a culture. It's quite phenomenal. And I've been there now 13 times. People said, oh, it's going to wear off. You're going to see the problems in it the more often you go. Instead, it's just the opposite. I become more impressed every time I go because more things have developed since I was last there, like the ending of the ETA. That existed when I first went. It doesn't anymore. Lots of things like that have changed. So I'm going to go to Ben and then Katie.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a brief memoriam to Sam Keen, who I didn't know personally, but I saw speak a number of times at Praxis events and went to events up at his place. And he, for me, was an example of he was a great heterodox intellectual. And I really enjoyed, I have this dog in me too, which is he would take some shibboleth, which was widely shared by the liberal members of the audience, and then take a contrarian position, have a whole room full of people yelling at him, and he loved it. He loved all that friction. And I thought, well, I like that. I'll take on some of that style. So I just wanted to give that appreciation to him as a interlocutor and public figure.
Yeah, he did know how to get people riled up. And sometimes that's what he really wanted to do, was rile up the audience so they would think. And first they would get mad sometimes, and then hopefully think after that. But I remember someone coming up. I spoke with him at an event in Walnut Creek many, many years ago. And after the talk, a woman came up and she said, you talk about all these horrible images. This is kind of the face of the enemy, the posters. And she said, can't we just be about peace and love? And he said, oh, you want me to take on your shadow? And yeah, this is typical Sam. He really would put it right back where it belongs. And as he said in the book, a lot of the what we see in the enemy is projecting from ourselves and our culture. So, Katie.
Just want to add, I notice as I sit here, I feel inadequate, really, in contrast to the amount of power of these two men. Ofer Zur and Sam Keen were huge giants in this decade. they were deep thinkers, and they were archetypes. And we're losing a lot of those. So I guess I just want to say, encourage you, Georgia, to bring to these dialogues, if you have more, to bring without any kind of timidity your own views of these men, maybe a few quotes from what they said. These men have a lot of power, and it's a big loss. The only personal thing I would add is the thing that they brought was amount of bravery, amount of courage, a great impact because they spoke up and they weren't shy about it. And the only current thing I could say for my own thing here is that we have just this week seen Cory Booker. We've seen the Wisconsin female win her government over Elon Musk trying to buy people's votes. And we see Bernie Sanders speaking up with courage, a Jewish man. And so let's all get out there and be the heroes. We're going to need some replacements. We got lots of work to do.
Yes, we do indeed. There's some other, oh, I actually did write, I guess I'm hesitant because I have so many stories I could tell about Sam. And
Don't be hesitant.
I did write about some of them, and I'm looking for the link. As soon as the next person speaks, I'll go look up for the link. I wrote an article about Sam that's in the current issue of the Sonoma Valley Sun, and I'll put the link in. There's also a really nice article on Sam in the Sonoma Index Tribune, and I just heard today that there's an obit on him in the New York Times today. So all these things are available, and I will try to get the one from the Sun and the Index Tribune in the chat box shortly. But yeah, I would have many stories, and I just didn't want to. I wanted people to be able to give their own.
I appreciate that. I mean, but I feel like these, even those main points about propaganda and the faces of the enemy, these men saw these things far beyond beyond the history we're in now.
Yes, and part of it goes back to the questioning, that not making assumptions, like Kim mentioned earlier. There's so many assumptions. And one of the things Sam used to say a lot is that from the moment we're born, we get software shoved into our brains. So what is it that we think that is really our thinking? How much of it has come from other places? So that the necessity to question. And another writer I read many years ago now, Gerda Lerner, who wrote a book called The Creation of Patriarchy. And she said, we even have to question the way we question.
Wow. Is that a good book?
It's a very good book, The Creation
Fabulous.
of Patriarchy.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
Oh,
really good. And she said, we even have to question the way we question because we've been trained to question in a certain way, in a patriarchal way.
yeah.
So, when you put all these kinds of thinking together, which is what I love doing and find so much fun, something gels. You start getting an expanded sense of what reality is instead of this very small pathway that's been created for us through all the software that's been shoved into our brains. It's hard to get that out or to get it to stop being the predominant role in our thinking.
Really hard.
Yeah, it's hard. But, these are some of the things. I had many conversations with Sam over the years, usually afternoon tea. That was the favorite thing, both of us. And, a lot of these are a lot of the ideas that we talked about. And we talked about politics a lot, too. Sometimes we didn't agree. Usually we did. But it was kind of fun to tussle, too, when we didn't agree. And Ofer the same way. Ofer went through a lot of changes. In recent years, he became a different person than he was when I wasn't speaking to him for 10 years. Because that was also true. And he said to me one time when we were having dinner, he said, why weren't you speaking to me for 10 years? And I said, because you were making all those misogynist remarks. He said, oh, yeah.
Thank you.
And that's
Thank
all he
you.
said, oh yeah. And so, but then everything was fine. But I did see a complete change in him, which was quite extraordinary.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, and so, people can change, and I think, need to allow people to change because sometimes we have such a vision of a person that we can't get it out of our mind. And we have to be open to the possibility that there might be change. And sometimes that's hard to do, but that works personally and politically, I think.
And Sam softened as well, and those are good images of males in our culture who had power and also softened.
Softened with years. And it's good they live long enough to soften.
Yeah.
Yes, Diana.
I was wondering where to see the film, Faces of the Enemy.
Yeah,
And
is Bill
I also wanted to say that one of the things, Joel's, in my book is about the Guru Papers, is showing people the software that's been implanted in them that has hidden authoritarianism and conditioning and guilt and all that kind of thing. That's so people experience deprogramming through reading the book.
Yeah. Did you put that in? I can put it in the chat.
Well, I live down in Orange County and I had to really hunt. I couldn't find it anywhere other than an art theater in Santa Ana. So, depending on where you're living, just, research it. You'll probably find it somewhere. It's out. It's playing in Oakland. It's playing in Santa Ana. You'll find it.
Faces of the Enemy is a new
Oh,
film.
I'm sorry. No, other land. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the
Oh
one.
yeah, I think that's in Sebastopol at the Rialto
Oh,
now.
really?
I think so.
It's worth seeing. It gives you a journey of what's possible with a relationship between two activists, an Israeli and a Palestinian. And it shows you viscerally what it's like to be a Palestinian, totally thrown off your land. This particular community went to live in caves. I mean, it's just amazing.
And one of the two filmmakers was severely beaten recently.
Yes.
Really?
It won an Oscar.
Yeah. But
What's it
after
called,
that, he was
Linda? What's
beaten.
it called that you're talking about?
No
Other
other
land?
land. It's worth seeing.
Yeah, it won an Oscar for Best Documentary.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Quite eye-opening.
indeed. So Ben, I'm going to let you go, and soon we'll end, but go
Well,
ahead.
I was about to bring that up, that within a week of having received an Oscar for his documentary film, the Palestinian guy went back to his home in the West Bank, was pulled out of his car by a gang of settlers, beaten badly, and then arrested by the IDF and incarcerated for a few days. So that shows you how far gone that culture is, that because he had the notoriety of having produced this film, he became an enemy to them.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's how perverse that logic of the enemy can become, that to the point where that's why they're killing all the journalists, because they don't want eyes on their evil deeds. And they have managed to take out most of the eyes that can communicate the truth of the matter. So yeah, it's pretty dire. And the fact that to me just was like a kind of a bad gauge of where the settler society is in Israel.
Mhm.
That would be the response they would provoke, which is not a PR move to
Right.
make. That's just irrational behavior.
Yeah, that's why free speech right now for me is the number one issue.
Yeah, well, we're losing that day by day. So yeah, I think some really good ideas came out of today, and some good reference materials to look at too, or to read. And it's a kind of discussion that we're having today that I would almost like to have more focused on one of the issues. Of course, they all interplay. That's the thing, the propaganda, the creation of enemies, and the dualistic nature of looking at warfare and disagreements. Um, I think it's something worth having a discussion on again, if people are interested in it. But next week, if there's a sufficient interest, and we need 10 people to let me know they want to be in on the discussion, or it's not worth doing. But if we get 10 people, we can talk about what's going on in our country in more detail and what we might be able to do about it, how we can have any impact whatsoever. And I think we can, but I need to come together as groups and figure some things out and share our knowledge. So if you want to do that, we would do that next week at 4. And let me know if you're interested. Otherwise, we won't do it. And Michael Murphy's on the 18th. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.